Hello, welcome to our worship facility webinar, Improving Your Video Directing and Content Capture Skills. I'm Gene Last, editor of Worship Facility. With me today is Ben Stapley. Ben, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Hello, Worship Facility. My name is Ben Stapley, and I'm excited to be joining you for this webinar. We're going to be talking about improving your video directing and your content capturing. I'm very excited to be going on this journey with you today. But before we do that, let me tell you a little bit more about myself before we jump into the actual talk. So let me tell you more about myself before we jump into the talk. So I've worked, first of all, before even jumping into ministry, I worked for about 5 years in Toronto, Ontario as a national television producer and reporter. And then after that, I bounced down into New Jersey. I've worked at multiple mega site churches on their executive team. First of all, I worked at Liquid Church in New Jersey. And then after that, I bounced down to Miami and worked at Christ Fellowship Miami. And then surprisingly, I actually moved back up to New Jersey where I'm the executive pastor at the Life Christian Church. Now I know most people when they leave New Jersey, they don't come back. I'm one of the few people that actually came back to New Jersey. So that's who I am. Now let me tell you this as well. I'm gonna unpack a lot of information during the talk today, but if there's something I talk about that you wanna learn more and you want additional coaching, then go to my website, benstapley.com/coach. I would love to be able to give you more information and actually can set up a free consultation with you, find out what your problems are, and if I'm the right person to help you solve them, and then if so, I'd love to move forward with you. Now, I always like a good roadmap. Where are we going to go on this journey during this webinar? So let me walk you through that so you know where we're going to go and you can plan accordingly. First of all, we're going to be talking about general principles for improving your video directing. And then after that, what are some principles that apply particularly for worship? After that, hey, how to improve your video capture? You might be a great video director, but if your capture process is not good, then you're kind of sunk. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at, hey, how do we move beyond not just capturing for the weekend, but also could we capture during the week? Could we capture not just for people on Sunday morning, but could we capture during the week for people online? And if so, what are some best practices to do that? And then lastly, what are some takeaways that we can all walk forward with as well? Okay, why don't we jump into some general practices when it comes to video directing? The first one I have is that IMAG, image magnification, serves the audience. At the end of the day, as you as a video director, the reason you're doing this is not to scratch your creative desires, not to be self-expression of what you think as an artist, but to serve your audience, for the people who are watching this experience. Ultimately, you are trying to do this for them. Now, true, there is going to be some self-expression on your end, but the end result should be serving your audience. The reason I say this is because I remember I was in a setting once when I was a younger video director. I was in my early 20s, and I was video directing for my vantage point, what I wanted to do. So there was a lot of fast cuts, a lot of quick movements. The problem was my audience watching were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And for them, it just felt completely spastic. It felt like a disconnect. What I wanted to do and what they wanted to receive was very different. So at the end of the day, think through who your audience is and how you can serve them, not your own creative desires. 2, stay one step ahead. Now this is a unique challenge because you're trying to do two things at once. You're trying to be in the moment, to be capturing what is happening at a given time, but you're also trying to be ahead of the curve, being aware of what is coming so that you can capture it accordingly. So in other words, you need to be aware of what's happening on that text sheet, on your rundown, your run through, whatever you call it. We all call it different things, but you need to be aware of what's happening so you can capture what's going on now and what's happening. So, okay, the worship song is about to end. Hey, you know what? Let's get ready for that GoPro and the drum cage because we're gonna crash out, and let's take it. Crash, 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 crash. Okay, the host is coming on. Let's get ready for that wide shot. Okay, and we take that. Now they're walking on center stage. Camera 1, get ready to center them once they get in the podium. Okay, they're centered. Take camera 1. We're doing all these things, being in the moment, but also one step ahead. That'll make sure that you're not surprised and that you're able to capture that content instead of always feeling like you're behind the curve. It's really helpful in this position as well, if you can, to have a video director and a switcher, or a technical director and a switcher. Somebody who can call the shots, but also someone who's implementing the shots. If you're trying to do both at the same time, it can be a real challenge to be one step ahead. So my encouragement is to have two people in that position to make sure you're one step ahead. 3, keep it tight. The reason you want your framing to be pretty tight is because when you're closer to people, when you're tighter on them, you can see expression, you can sense emotion. It's a more intimate experience. So if I was talking with you here in the webinar and I was back here the whole time, you would feel a little disconnected to me and what's going on. So I'm purposely sitting on the edge of my chair and getting close. Maybe not so close that you can see my pores. Maybe this is a little too intense, so I'm backing off here a bit. But I am fairly close and the framing is fairly tight so that you can see me. Keeping it tight is also super important nowadays because people are not just watching in your auditorium on your big LED wall or your big projectors. They're also watching at home on their medium-sized televisions, or they're also watching on their smaller laptops, or a lot of your audience is watching on these very small devices called phones. If you are wide on a shot, on a phone, it's really hard to connect with who's communicating, what's going on, their intention, their emotions. Keeping it tight, make sure that you convey the emotional tone of what is being said. 4, don't just call, but cue. So what this is, if you're not familiar with the language, calling a shot is when you take a shot. Take 1, take 2, take 3. Cueing a shot is when you ready the shot. So ready camera 1, take 1. Ready camera 3, take 3. This is super important for your camera operators. Now, I've had a chance to serve across all the production fields in my 15 plus years in ministry. I've been the service producer, I've been the video director, I've been camera operators. And when you as a camera operator are getting cues and calls, you're set up for success because you're told in advance that they're going to come to you, and then they do come to you, which, in case you're still stabilizing your shot, gives you a last second to do it. And then you have an anticipation that you're going to be used. And then when you are, you're fully aware of it. Most churches, most cameras, most systems at this point have tally lights, those little red lights on top so that you know that you're live, but not all do. And even as a camera operator, sometimes you're not looking on that. You're not fixated on that. You're fixated on what's in your monitor. And so you're listening to those verbal cues of the calls and the cues that you're going to be used in a second. So as a video director, make sure to cue the call before you take the call. 5, encourage folks. I probably struggle at this one the most personally. A lot of my video directing in the past has been a lot of coaching, maybe some critiquing as well, but not much celebration. But at the end of the day, most of us thrive off of celebration. We need critiquing and we need coaching, but we really thrive when we are celebrated. I think we all know the old adage, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So how are you rewarding your people? How are you telling them this is a great job? Obviously, you can do that after the service ends and everything has died down in between services, or maybe even a note during the week. But I usually forget to do that, or I do want to do it, but I forget actually what to celebrate, what actually worked really well. So this is my encouragement to you. If you have a video in your service, most services do have some type of video, take that moment, that 30 seconds, 60, 90, 2 minutes, whatever it is, to give an encouragement to a team member. During the videos, you're not really thinking about anything. It's a little bit of dead air time. You have that downtime to do that. So give that encouragement. The other thing here too is you might not be able to encourage all your camera operators, right? Especially if you have 3, 4, 5, 10 camera operators. It's hard to go through the whole list. But even if you just take one to single them out and to say, hey, everyone, we're doing a fantastic job, but I just want to highlight camera 3. I love that slow push and movement there. I know that's a hard technique to do, but you did that very well. Thank you, 3, for doing that. Guys, we're doing a great job. Let's keep rocking it. That small 30 seconds of encouragement, make sure the next 30 minutes is a very positive experience for your camera operators. So make sure to encourage them. 6, knowing when to cut. This is super important for your communicators because it can be a hard time to know when do I actually make the cut. The best time to make the cut is at the end of a sentence. It's a natural time to give that connection point and to cut to a different camera. The hard thing here is a lot of communicators give run-on sentences. I do it as well. We're scared of the silence. If I pause, I might lose people. So I'm just going to keep on talking on and on and on, and there's no end to my sentence, and there's no opportunity for you to cut. So I know that's a bit of a tension, but look for those opportunities when the communicator pauses and cut on the end of the sentences. 7, frame it differently. When you are cutting from shot to shot, make sure the framing is differently, especially if it's a communicator like myself. You want to go from, hey, maybe we're going to go from the bust shot, this tight shot, to a medium shot, to a waist-up shot. And then maybe we're going to go a little farther out, and it's a wider shot, it's a head to toe, or it's a knees up. Whatever it is, frame it differently. It looks weird when you cut from one camera to another camera of the same communicator, and it's the same framing. This feels odd to us, like it's almost like a jump cut. So try to keep that framing different. And that also applies also to worship as well, not just for communicators, but for your worship. If you got a vocalist and they're singing and you got them a waist-up shot, and you cut to another vocalist singing, center framed, waist up, it does this weird morph thing where it looks like it's transitioning them. And it kind of fools your eyes, like, what am I seeing here? Is that the same person? It's the same framing. Oh no, it's a different person. It takes that half second for your mind to figure out what's going on. And let's avoid that mental confusion for people by when you cut to a different shot, make sure it's a different framing of the person as well. And then it will clearly seem purposeful for the viewer and they'll understand what's happening much faster. Okay, so those were my 7 best practices in general for video directing. Now I got 6 best practices when it comes to worship in particular. What are some ways in which we can make worship awesome when it comes to video directing? And the first thing I'd have to say is knowing the music. This is key. Oftentimes we expect our musicians, our vocalists, our performers to know the music. They have to come in and do that. They have to know their music. But from a production standpoint, whether or not they listen to the music doesn't really matter. No. It does matter, especially if you are a video director. You need to know your music. So what I encourage you to do is to get your PCO, your Planning Center online, download that playlist and listen to it during your commute. Also, when you listen to it, don't listen to it on shuffle, but listen to it in the order in which the songs are going to be performed. Because then you can kind of lock some things in. Okay, the first song starts with a guitar solo. I need to make sure I got that. Okay, the second song, it's really keys driven. I'll make sure that's highlighted as well. Okay, the third song has like a Selah in between. There's a moment of pause that's going on. It's just an instrumental bridge where everything dies down. How do I capture that? Maybe I'm going to go to a wide shot and show that reflective moment then. I know it crashes out with the drums. Okay, I'll make sure to get the GoPro and capture that in the drum cage at the end. When you listen to the music, you intuitively think through your shots as well. And it sets you up for success because you know what's going to happen before Sunday morning, and then you're trying to scramble and figure it out then. 2, keep the movement going. So worship is very dynamic. There's a lot of things going on. You got the songs, the instruments, the lyrics, the tempo, a lot of it's going on. But sometimes our video directing is very static. And our worship is dynamic, but our video directing is not dynamic. So I try to match the 2 styles. If your worship is very dynamic, and most people it is, unless you're maybe a hymns only church where it's a very stoic pace. If that's the case, you do have dynamic worship. Make sure your shots show that. Keep the movement going. So, can you do some pushes, some pulls, some pans? I'm not a huge fan of tilts in that movements. Maybe you have a jib or a crane coming in, doing some flyover movements. Whatever it is, even if you don't have big expensive gears like a jib, even a couple of cameras on sticks, you can do some basic movements to keep it dynamic so that your shots stylistically reflect your worship. Now again, if your worship isn't that dynamic, that it's pretty stoic in its approach, maybe you're more liturgical in your approach, which is great, then make sure your shots reflect that as well. if you are reciting the Nicene Creed, you don't necessarily want to put a Dutch angle on that and make it, whoa, super dynamic, because that feels weird, that feels out of place. So stylistically match what is happening with your worship. 3, I like to push in as much as possible, because when you push in, things get more intimate. You're literally getting closer to the communicators. And so generally speaking, I try to refrain from pullouts, maybe at the swell or at the end of a song to show grandeur, to show how big the room is. Maybe I'll pull out them. But generally speaking, I like to push in. Beginning of a song, we get a little closer to the worship leader. During it as well. I'm going to play actually a shepherd's tone for you right now. And you guys are going to hear this in the background as I'm talking. And a shepherd's tone, if you're not familiar with it, it's an audio experience where it tricks your mind. It sounds like it's continually getting higher, but what's happening is the wave files are just repeating underneath themselves. So it's the same sound experience, but it sounds like it that it's getting higher and higher. I'm going to stop that or you're all going to go crazy right now. But if you push in, you do the same thing. If you're continually pushing in with your shots, not continually, but if you use a push in multiple times during a song, it feels like it's getting more intimate and that you're getting closer to the subject, which is super helpful to, again, build up intimacy, because oftentimes worship is a very intimate experience. Our video directing should reflect that stylistically some way, and a push-in is a good way to do that. 4, tempo. Whatever the tempo of your song is, your video directing should match that. So if the BPMs are really high, it's in the hundreds, then make sure that you cut a little faster than you maybe normally would. The BPMs are low, it's in the 80s or it's in the 70s, then make sure that cut a little slower than you would. Maybe you want to pull in that T-bar and you want to dissolve, and not just cut your shots, but maybe you want to dissolve your shots on a slower song than that. Whatever the tempo of your songs are, simply stated, make sure your tempo reflects that, because it wants to complement the music, not contrast to it. So again, figure out what your tempo is and then change your cutting to match that. 5, emphasize the worship leader. This is really important, not just for people in the room, but people outside of the room. If you have an overflow, if you have a service online, people are, again, watching it on these things. Who's the person singing this? Who am I supposed to be following? Who's most prominent in the mix? And then who's the person who knows the song really well? Who should I be looking at on stage if I'm new and I don't know the song? And, oh, okay, I see them backing up the mic. Okay, apparently we're not singing this section, or this is a section where we go, lull, or they're coming back onto the mic, and oh, we're going to jump back into something. The worship leader gives all those visual cues to your audience. So again, to emphasize them, that helps them be aware of what's going on. Now you see I use the word emphasize them and not like showcase them, because they're not the only one on stage. You have other worship team members, you have other band members, you want to show them as well. And so don't just solely show your worship leader, or it looks like we're kind of giving them like hero, a hero position. Wow, it's them. You want to show other people as well, but you just want to make sure that you show an abundance of whoever's leading that particular song. It's really helpful. And then 6, and lastly, stage presence matters. Now this is a really tricky one, because at the end of the day, I can't see into your heart. I don't know what's going on between you and God in terms of who's on stage. And even when it comes to that, some people may see one person and evaluate them or connect with them differently, and some person may see that same person and not connect with them. So at the end of the day, when we say stage presence, it's a very subjective term, because one person may see an engaged worship leader and say, man, they encouraged me, I connected with them, they got enthusiastic for the song and helped me get more involved with the song as well. Some other people may see an enthusiastic worship leader and say, wow, they are showboaty, or they are all about them, or they're putting on a show for me. And they may feel disingenuous and detached from the person. So again, when we talk about stage presence, it's a very subjective term. So I understand that. That being said, what I encourage video directors is to think through stage presence as they're showcasing people. generally speaking, I've had worship leaders or I've had vocalists, and they said, you know what, like when I connect with God, I kind of, my body tunes down, and it's a very simple process for me. And if I do any more than just speak to Him, that's all I have, and that's all I feel I can give to Him, because any more than that is false to who I am. And when I'm singing to Him, I'm just thinking about the words, and I'm not thinking about anything else. And so my body literally does nothing else because my mind is just focused on what I'm singing. And I'm not raising my hands or moving my body to the temple, but I'm just thinking about the words, and I'm so focused on those because I want them to be true as I'm trying to sing them, and I want my heart posture to be right. And so I don't focus on anything else. And that's all. Again, that's a beautiful thing. But if you only showcase those people, then it might be hard for people who want to be enthusiastic with their worship and saying, well, am I allowed to raise my hands here? Can I do that? What kind of church are we? What kind of style of worship do we do? What do we lead people towards? When you're thinking about stage presence, think about that and think about, okay, what kind of church are we? How's our worship? And then showcase that in relationship to the people on stage. Again, very subjective matter, but you need to be thinking through it from a philosophical standpoint, because what you show is what you are going to reap. And so if you're showing this type of worship, then you're encouraging your people to do that. So think that through as you're video directing. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about improving your video capture. So what are just some ways in terms of setting up your room, situating your cameras, doing all that type of stuff to make sure that your capture process is as good as possible. So not even video directing, just the capture itself. And I got nine different ways to walk us through that. And the first way is to make sure that the camera is on eye level. You're going to see an example here from a great church of mine, great friend of mine, Chris Morenti. And he interacted with me a number of years ago and said, hey, will you watch our services? And what do you see? What do you not like? How would you change this? And one of the things I saw a number of years ago was what you're seeing right now, this bird's eye perspective. They had a number of their cameras up in their balcony looking down. And they set it up because they didn't want to be intrusive. Hey, if the cameras are up here, they're not on the floor, they're not obtrusive, it's a better experience for people in the room. I said, yes. But it looks like, if I'm watching it online, as you're watching it right now, it feels like I'm an interloper. It feels like I'm not actually invited into the room, like I'm looking down on you from above. I said, why don't you do this? Why don't you put your cameras on the floor level and get them all on the floor level, which you're now seeing right now, and it's going to make things a lot more intimate. It's going to feel like I'm in the room, and that I'm connected with you, and that I'm not an interloper, but I'm actually allowed to be here with you and to listen from you. So if you can, get the cameras on eye level. If you're going to be, really nuanced here, I would say from a slight perspective, put them a little bit down and have them looking slightly up. Generally speaking, if we're on eye level, we're peers. Generally speaking, if a camera is, if the audience is, the talent is below, then you're putting the viewer in an authoritative perspective, they're looking down on them. And if the communicator is above, then the communicator is in the authoritative position. If we are communicating God's word, and if we're saying this is who He is, and He's told us how to live life, and how to navigate through this world, and how to be His children, then we're coming to our audience with a position of authority. Not we ourselves are that authority, but we're saying He's the authority, and I'm just presenting Him to you. And because of that, I like to slightly put my communicators slightly above, not because they are above the audience, but what they're presenting is. And from a stylistic perspective, you are communicating that with where you put your cameras. If I put my cameras a little below, then I'm saying that what the communicator is communicating is slightly above, and we need to be in a receptive mode to that. So if you're going to put your cameras, put them on eye level, and if you're going to be nuanced, put them slightly below the communicator so that they put the communicator in a position of authority. 2, place the camera on axis. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the I Am Second video series. It's a great series. If you've never shown it, I encourage you to check it out. It's of people saying how that they are second, God is first, and that they are second. It takes a number of world-known celebrities, people that we all know, and they share their faith and their testimony. Stylistically, I like what they do because they put the chair right in the middle, and then they put the communicator right there and the camera right in front of them. And the person's communicating right down the barrel of the lens. And the reason I like it is it makes it a very intimate experience. They're talking right to me. They're sharing their story right to me. They're not talking to an interviewer off camera. They're not talking off axis, but they're talking directly on axis. So the same reason I encourage people in the rooms, when you're capturing your communicators, try to capture them on axis as much as possible. You'll see the diagram here from TLCC. When I first showed up, we had our cameras kind of spread out, which caused a bit of attention for our communicators. When we jumped around, it sometimes felt like they were communicating off axis. We put all those cameras together, and you can see the effect here. It's a much better experience. I'll show you a video clip of what that looks like. And if you agree with that, just hashtag Team Ryan. Put that in the comments right now. Let us know that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed it. Hashtag Team Ryan if you enjoyed Secretariat last week. I felt like after the message, I was a horse expert. I learned what a furlong was. I learned what a triple crown was. I learned what a quadruple crown was. I learned all the horsing terminology from this movie. Thank you, Pastor Ryan, for that great message. So that's an example of having the cameras on axis makes it a much better experience. The only trick there is to get them as close as possible so that when the communicator's talking and you cut to the different cameras, it doesn't feel like they're slightly looking off camera when you go back and forth. 3, get more cameras. If you want a better experience, you need some more cameras. I was coaching a church through this recently, and they're saying, hey, it's a real struggle for us. We don't have much money. And here's the tension. You don't necessarily need a lot more of your cinema cameras, some high-end cameras, long lenses, expensive gear. They had a bunch of cameras in the back, but they had nothing on stage. And so with a small investment of a couple of GoPros that was mounted into the drum cage, and then one mounted onto the keyboard player, they were able to get a much more dynamic experience. So anytime there was a keyboard lead, we can now cut to that shot. When the song concluded with a drum fill, we could cut to that shot. So when I say get more cameras, don't think that you're going to be breaking the bank. You can get a couple of on-stage cameras to get some instrumental shots for a much cheap investment, but it's going to increase the experience a lot more. 4, move cameras. So you can do this in a very expensive setting with a jib or a crane, which even stylistically, I'm not the biggest fan of. It seems a little showboaty, a little grandiose, and these only work in venues that are really big. If you got a small room and you got a jib, it looks like overkill. And even in big rooms, it can feel like overkill. If you're the person sitting underneath the jib and it's always swaying over your head, it feels a little reckless at times. So you can invest in a jib or a crane. It's a lot of movement and it's a lot of expense, but what I encourage is a slider. It's a real simple investment. Sometimes you have the camera itself on the tripod, on a slider, it's on a track, and so the whole unit is moving back and forth. That's a bit of an expense and a bit of an investment. It looks good though. But even a small slider where you put the camera on the slider itself, and it's just moving back and forth, not the whole tripod itself, just the camera sitting on there is a small investment, but it makes a really dynamic shot. I'm showing you an example right here from TLCC. I think the slider cost about $100, but you see how dynamic it is. Just that slow movement back and forth gives some more investment for your experience. So consider moving your cameras. 5, increase your lighting. So if you want a better capture, you're gonna need more lighting. Oftentimes churches will kind of go cheap on the lighting experience, which then really compromises your capture. Unless you have high-end cameras that don't get a lot of grain when they increase your ISO, you're gonna need something more visible on light, more visible on stage, which I know is tough because you kind of want that moody environment with low light environments. The hard thing is your cameras don't like that. They want to get more light on stage. So if you can, increase the light that's going on stage. It'll make the capture experience for your cameras, especially if they're consumer or prosumer level. It'll help them out with what they're capturing. When you're trying to dimly lit the environment and it's not a high-end camera, it's gonna look really, really grainy. So increase your light, it'll improve your capture. Anchor your communicator. I'm going to show you a quick example in a tutorial I gave to my old church, Christ Fellowship, where we had two communicators. A young communicator who was stationary, and it was much easier to capture him, much better to capture him. And one of our older communicators who was used to just walking back across the stage and kind of gave us motion sickness trying to follow him because it was so much back and forth. So watch this video as I try to coach the older communicator to being a little more stationary and some of the advantages that you would get by anchoring your communicator.
Hey, Pastor Rick, Ben Stapley here. I wanted to show a comparison of a recent message of yours and a recent message of Omar's to identify two areas in which we could possibly grow with your communication for online. You do a phenomenal job in the room, but there's two quick areas to grow for online communication where we have our biggest audience. I took both your messages, about 10 minutes of it, and compressed it down to about a minute, so we saw some repeat things happening again and again. The first thing is stationary. You see that Omar is relatively stationary, which allows us to punch in tighter with the shot and makes it more dynamic, right? If I was far away, it would be hard to engage with me, but if I'm close, you get my emotion, you see my expressions because I'm not moving around. So try to stay a little more stationary. And then the other big thing is trying to make eye contact with the camera. You see Omar doing this as well. You see me doing it right now. I'm looking at the camera and you're connecting to me. When you're in the room, you're talking to one side and you're talking to another side, and so it never feels like you're talking to me, which is okay if we were just a single site, PB, but we're not, right? We got multiple campuses. And then our biggest campus is online, where they're all experiencing us through the screen. So for the sake of all of our other campuses outside of our broadcast campus and our largest online, try to make more eye contact with camera. You've done a phenomenal job this past year, taking a lot of coaching from me. And so here's just a small other nugget for 2021.
7, recruit more volunteers. At the end of the day, some of your capture experience can be improved by just having more volunteers. I've never known a production team to say, hey, we've had too many volunteers, we need to turn people away. Usually it's not, it's the latter. You're in the control room and you're the video director and you're the switcher. You're doing two roles at once. Or maybe you're a camera operator and you're operating two cameras. I've seen that happen as well. Your production diminishes because your volunteerism does. But when you increase it and you get more volunteers, your capture gets better. One of the simple ways I've seen this happen is a beautiful way. If you're investing in your production shirts, most churches will do that. They'll give the production crew a black shirt, it says production crew on the front or something like that. Oftentimes, people don't use advantage of the back of the shirt. What I love to do on the back of the shirt is to say, join us, production at XYZ Church. And so on the back of the shirt, it's encouraging people to join the production team by emailing production at XYZ Church. This is super helpful. I've seen this literally happen in churches where it's a parent and it's a teen and the service is going on and the teen's like a little disengaged. And they look up and they say, oh my goodness, look at that. You could be a camera operator. And I've seen the parent real time emailing, my son wants to get involved, or I want my son to get involved in your production team. Tell me how to do this. It's a great way to invite more people. Also too, sometimes the production team, for some people or some crews, it can seem like it's a clique. And it's just like a special people that are allowed. And those people in the dark shirts, they just hang around each other and am I allowed in? Do they want me in? Will I have the skills to do it? When you're a shirt that says join us, you're letting people know we are an open and inviting team and we'd love to have you there. Again, most production teams don't exude that. That simple explanation in the back of the shirt, I've seen it double some production teams within a couple of months because it just communicates to people, we want you to join. This is how you do it. 8, train your volunteers. Whenever I've consulted with churches and they ask, hey, what gear should I buy? How do we make this better? The first question I ask them is, when's the last time you provided a half day of training for your production volunteers? And usually, most churches, it's been years. So I say, hey, before you spend lots of money doing the hard work, let's spend no money doing the easy work. Just training our volunteers, getting them together. Maybe you need to pull in an outside consultant, which I'd love to help you do if you need that person. Maybe you pull in someone outside to help train them, By giving that training, it's a very low investment to improve things. But oftentimes churches jump right to the expensive thing, right? We need cinema cams. We need to capture in 4K. We need all these expensive things. No. Do the easy thing. Do the cheap thing first. Invest in your volunteers. Train them. And then after that, see if you need to buy some more gear. And lastly, with number 9, it doesn't need to be in 4K. I say this a little tongue-in-cheek because I've had a lot of churches reach out to me recently and say, hey, do we need to jump into 4K? Everything seems 4K. No, you don't. No, you don't. For a couple reasons. First of all, a lot of us don't have the whole infrastructure needed. So we might have the camera at 4K, but unless the whole system itself is designed for that, whatever the weakest link is in that system, it's going to downgrade that footage to that. So it's a huge investment, not just the cameras, but your whole capturing process to jump into 4K from 1080 to 4K. So I'm saying that you don't need that. And when I say that you don't need 4K, I'm just talking in general. That you don't need the latest thing that's out there to improve your capture process. You might see what another church is doing. Oh my goodness, look at this, the stabilizers these guys or these girls are using. Or look at the cinema lenses this church is using down the road. You don't need the biggest gear out there. Because at the end of the day, gear will only get you so far. It gets you good, but it only gets you so far. You need a great heart posture, you need to train your volunteers, and you need to keep the mission in front of them so they're excited to serve. If you do those things, you will get 90% of the way of improving your capture experience. And then the last 10% may be improving your gear, but think of that last, and that's why I stated this point last, because churches usually inverse it, and they like to falsely think about it first and thinking about it last. So next we're going to be talking about capturing during the week and the weekend. Most of us capture during the weekend because we're capturing for the people that are in the room. But what I'm advocating for is us to capture during the week as well for the online audience, especially for the message. If you're able to do this, it makes the experience so much better because the communicator is talking directly to that audience. They're saying, hi, online campus. So looking at the camera. Instead of saying, hey, welcome to my church this morning. It's so great to have you guys here, blah, 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 blah. People online don't feel connected with that if you're just capturing during the weekend. If you're capturing during the week, they will feel connected by that. I'm going to show you, first of all, an example of myself. And the reason why, right? Why are we going to do this? 3 reasons. First of all, it's going to make things better online. This is a message of mine that I'm going to play from the summer where I had a chance to communicate during the week to our online audience. Let's take a look at that. Hello, Church Online Campus. It is great to be with you today for this series at the movies. I don't know if you're excited, but I'm excited for this series. My name is Ben Stapley. I'm the executive pastor here at TLCC. It's great to be talking with you this morning. So you saw me connecting right with the online audience. It made them feel so much better instead of watching me communicate to the room. So I encourage you to consider it for that. The other reason why is it not only makes online better, but it's going to make on-site better as well. What I mean by that is this. When I communicated during the week, and we captured it during the week, some feedback was given to me. Hey, Ben, that was a good message, but come Sunday, you probably want to make these tweaks to make it even better. That was super helpful because then I did make it better. I was once interacting with a pastor, and they were talking from a passage. I'm going to bring it up here, and they were reading this passage again and again. And they were doing this during the week, capturing it for their online audience. And as they said it, there was a phrase they repeated again and again and again. And I was totally distracted. I was not paying attention because my junior high mind kind of kicked into gear. If you're not familiar with the phrase, I'll highlight it right here. And if you don't know what it is, feel free to Urban Dictionary it. But I was not paying attention to what they were saying because that phrase has a double entendre that is sexual in nature. And so I said, hey, when it comes Sunday, I encourage you not to say that phrase 10 times over because if you do, no one is going to be paying attention. At least I won't be paying attention to you. Maybe I'm the only one who knows this phrase, but anyone else won't be paying attention to you. Maybe just say it once, and that's enough, and then move on. So when you do your capture during the week for your online audience, it will also make your on-site audience better, and that message for them better on the week, and because you can get some of that feedback and that coaching during that time as well. And then lastly, it might not be that hard for you to do to capture this. I was once talking with a church and they were telling me how their lead pastor every Wednesday goes into the auditorium and stands on stage and practices to an empty room because he wants to feel what it feels like. He wants to get a sense of walking around. Where's my blocking? What's my pacing like? I want to get a sense to speak into the room. I was like, oh my goodness, that's incredible. I said, do you guys capture that? And they said, no, why would we capture that? I said, because if you do capture it, he could tailor all of his comments to the online audience and make it just for them. And they said, we never thought about that. Like, all we have to literally do is turn the cameras on and get someone to frame them up and throw the mic on them. It's a low investment. He's already doing that work. Why don't we capture it? Your communicators are already probably practicing somewhere. It's maybe at their house on Thursday, maybe it's in their office on Friday, maybe it's in the auditorium on Wednesday. But if you can get them to practice in the auditorium with your production on, then you can capture it as well. And if you can capture it, you can communicate directly to your online audience. This step might not be as hard as it seems because, again, your communicator is already probably doing that. Try to capitalize that and make the experience so much better for your online audience. So then how do we do it? How do we capture well during the week for our online audience? I'm going to give you some tricks and best practices to do that. The first one is to make it easy for yourself. If you need to, just capture with one camera. That's what I'm doing here during this talk. I'm capturing with one camera, and when I need to, I just punch in. And then after a little bit, to make it dynamic and feel like we're still communicating to each other, in a couple of seconds, I'll punch out. Using one camera and this technique of punching in and punching out allows you to lower the production level because you're not over-investing with multiple cameras, but again, still make it dynamic. So consider that just using one camera and punching in and punching out when needed. 2, look into the lens. I need to say this even though it seems obvious. You want your communicator to look into the lens. This can be a trick because sometimes when communicators are on stage, they're used to looking across the whole room. Have them look directly into the lens of the camera. Even tell them, hey, it's this camera right here, Pastor, not that one to the side and not that one, but it's this one. Look here the whole time. That will set them up for success looking into the lens. 3, taping a photo under the lens. I've done this before where I had a hard time communicating to the camera. And I didn't know how to emotionally connect with who was on the other side of the lens. What I ultimately did was I just taped a photo of a friend underneath that camera. And whenever I felt a disconnect with who I was trying to communicate with, I looked at that friend to give me a visual reference. Okay, if I can connect with them and I'm reminded of them, then I'll be reminded of you and I'll connect with you. It's a quick way to change your communicator's posture from something rigid and stoic and just content I'm giving to you to something that's emotional because they're trying to connect not just to a lens, but the people behind the lens. And 4, lastly, try to place a person beside the camera, maybe underneath it or to its side. The reason is this: it can be really hard to communicate to an empty room. I don't know if what I'm saying is resonating at all. Even with you guys, I don't know if this point is connecting, but if I had someone placed by the camera really close to it, and I could, in my peripheral, see their body language, see when they're nodding their heads, like this is a good point, or they're laughing and they're not audibly laughing, but I can see they're connecting with what I'm doing. I know what I'm saying is resonating, and maybe I'll push into it. Or maybe I'm saying a point and it doesn't look like they're connecting, and so I need to step up my energy, or I need to back away from it because it's just not as important as I thought it was. And it's obviously not resonating with a person, so I'm going to move on. If you place that person near your camera, you can, from your peripheral, get some of their body language, and then as a communicator, you're resonating off somebody, and you're adjusting in real time instead of just to an empty room. Okay, now lastly, I want to have some takeaways. We talked about a lot of different things, but here are 3 takeaways for you in terms of improving your capture, especially when it comes to improving your gear. The first one is only move forward when you have buy-in. You want your leadership to be on the same page. We've talked about increasing gear. Well, what does that look like? Do you have buy-in from them? Because if you don't have buy-in, you're never going to get it done. You're going to be pushing that rock up a hill. So cast a strong vision for them. I think we should invest in a slider because I think it's going to help improve our quality. Or I think we need to hire an outside consultant to come in and to train our guys to get better at this. Get their buy-in first. And then after that, beyond buy-in, make sure that you have the budget. You always want to make sure what the full cost is of the project. And do we have all of that? Now let's move forward. If you only have half the cost, you're only getting half the project done. The problem is with video gear, if you only have half the gear, it's not going to work. You might have the camera, but if you don't have the cabling that's needed to go to the control room, it doesn't work. If you got the cabling to the control room but no projectors, it doesn't work. You need the whole budget to get the whole project done, or it's going to be very frustrating because you're going to invest half the money but get no of the returns on your investment. So make sure you have buy-in first, and then make sure you have budget second. And then the last takeaway is to upgrade because of calling and not comparison. At the end of the day, you want to make upgrades to your gear because you feel this is what God is calling your congregation to do, to help you guys move forward, not because it's what the church across the street or the church across the country is doing. You want to make upgrades to your gear because of the calling of God on your church, not the comparison to another church. Well, I hope this content has been helpful for you in terms of increasing your capturing and improving your video directing. Again, I'm Ben Stapley. I would love to connect with you guys in social media, so connect with me there and let me know what you learned from this. I would love to learn from you. What did I miss? Tell me. Also, if you or your church is looking for additional coaching, feel free to hit me up at benstapley.com/coach. I would love to come alongside you and help you be a wild success at your church. Have yourself an awesome day.
Thank you, Ben. That was some great information. I think people will really benefit from it. And thank you for attending today. If you have any questions, please send them to me at glass@worshipfacility.com and we'll get you some answers. Thanks again for attending, and thanks to you, Ben Stapley.